I think telling stories is a way to bond us with people outside the church and inside.
Yeah, because this is something that you've been doing for quite some time, telling stories of people in a local community. And I think one of the more common responses that I've seen in the comment sections is like, I go to church with that person and I never heard that story before.
Yeah.
And so being able to share the story of someone who's sitting right next to you in the pew on any other given Sabbath and actually be able to bring their experience to the forefront is a way for me to say, wow, I see that person a little bit better now, and I have a stronger relational bond to them.
Yes.
And there is this sense in which I feel closer to that person by hearing that person's story.
Yeah, stories build empathy. So the same part of your brain, this is really, really interesting piece of science, that the piece of your brain, when you remember an event that happened to you in your own life, is the same part of the brain that's activated when you read someone's story. So when they say, these are the events and this is how this played out, it actually puts you in their situation and gives you a little opportunity to look around, and you feel bonded to that person more than you would have otherwise. And I think this is important because the relational work with our community and with each other is so important to the success of everything we do. And so whatever we're creating has to be kind of with this mindset of we're always building and bonding to each other. And really, stories create a space that we don't always have in church. There is an aspect to love and relationships that requires us to be invested in somebody, to try to know them more. And we can love them better when we know them more. So being able to read through their experience and empathize with them, it just brings us closer. And from the outside, someone's going to connect much more with the personal testimony of somebody than they are to the announcement of potluck or the theological thing going on.
I'm thinking about the types of stories that most churches want to tell and maybe feel comfortable telling. It's like, oh, I was fill in the blank vice, or I had this negative experience for 20, 30, 40 years. And then Jesus.
Yeah.
And then now my life is better. It's perfect. And everything's wrapped up with a nice, neat little bow. Like that might be a really great story to have every once in a while on a Sabbath sermon or whatever the case is. But what I'm seeing work on the internet isn't always just these, I was one way and now I'm completely fixed and better stories.
Yeah. We, especially in the Adventist church, we have socialized ourselves to tell this victory story, to distance ourselves from our past. And right now, I think one thing that the world really wants from religious people is day-to-day reality. They want to see the struggle.
This is what people are talking about. Like, young people want transparency. Like, okay, like that's a phrase that we hear a lot. Young people want authenticity.
Yeah.
Well, what does that look like? Well, real life isn't always victorious in this triumphal like manner. Sometimes like you actually deal with stuff.
Yeah.
And people want to have an insight into how are other people dealing with it. And the reason why is because, well, if I'm dealing with the same thing and I feel like I'm at my wit's end, I've tried 3 or 4 different solutions, but then I hear your story and it was a different solution, I might actually be able to participate in that strategy as well.
Yeah, it can be really alienating, at least judging from the experiences I've talked to people about, to be on the outside of religion and to look in, and the things people are talking about are so separate from what you're dealing with in your life, or they say, 30 years ago, I had a drug problem. Well, the person with the drug problem now needs to talk to somebody who understands having a drug problem now,
So this doesn't necessarily mean that you highlight someone with a current drug problem, or is that what you're saying? Or do you say that the person who had a drug problem and has overcome, instead of just focusing on the overcoming piece, what if you focused on a story within the moment of them actually struggling?
Exactly. Yeah. I think we have to take away that pressure to distance ourselves so much, to separate an us and them, if that makes sense. We do it with ourselves.
Yeah.
So when we say, if someone says that I had a pornography addiction, that was in the past, I'm distant from that. I want to be as separate from that as possible. It's coming from a good place. Like, you should want to be away from bad things.
Of course. And you want to be able to say, hey, for you, there's hope for you as well. Like, you can overcome fill in the blank vice.
Yes. But I think the way that we tell these stories tends to be that I no longer relate to people going through that struggle. I am somehow ascended or better.
So give me an example. Let's say it's with the drugs and alcohol kind of a thing. What would be a type of story that you would think would work better than just, I used to be an alcoholic and then I met Jesus and now my life's better.
Yeah.
And I'm better than you.
I mean, I have real life examples of this from drug stories, for example. Interviewed a man who walked me through, I think it was his life at 10 or 11 years old. And just kind of the fear associated with that. He talked about, where he would be at certain times of the day and what was going on around him, and just the mindset of what it was like to live in that space. Had he instead said, 3 sentences or a couple of just like, I used to have real hard problems with drugs, and then focused all the rest on the over, like, it's fixed. Now my life is so good. God gives us this promise, and spends all their time on that piece. That's not the piece that people can relate to yet. It might be the thing that they want at the end of the story. They want to know that you can overcome. That's great. But you have to communicate that what you have experienced is something that is relatable to somebody else and what they're experiencing right now.
I think about that passage where it talks about like Jesus as someone who has been tempted in every way that we have, that Jesus is someone who actually understands what it means to be tempted. Like there was something about what he did, is that he put on flesh and he put himself in the mess, in our mess, so that we can know, hey, there's someone here, there's a God here who relates to us, who understands what we're going through.
Yeah. And we so underestimate the real life and actionable change that happens when we connect over story. So, we interviewed one young lady about a really horrible situation where she was going through abuse at the hands of a pastor, right? And that's a hard thing to talk about. And it doesn't paint the church in a necessarily like positive light. And yet, I think it's more bonding and it builds more trust with the community to be able to own up to those experiences and issues. What I saw happen in the comment section, that person said, hey, this is my story. I just want to invite anyone who has gone through this experience to come together. Let's create something together where we can share our stories safely, and we can heal from this, and we can work towards something better in the future. So from just that person contributing to a Facebook and Instagram post, what happened was 5 or 6 people in the next week came together and actually had a change in the pattern of their life to create space to talk about this stuff and to heal.
Wow.
And so it's not separate from our lives. This is part of these people's journeys, and this is part of their healing process even, both with each other and with the church.